It's supposed to make it
How will you wrap up? Good to see you. You know somebody else.
It's unlocked in the front.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I didn't get to go all the way. They just you'll get there.
They took the Allen wrench away from it. And they moved it back to the front.
So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna adjust the computer. I'm gonna make sure that that's. You can speak. I think it's good. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we can give Rabbi Wolvovsky our attention.
Shalom everyone. Good evening. And we're continuing our learning, our series really of pearls of Hasidic thought on the Parsha, where we delve into different matters and different ideas that are discussed in the Parsha from the point of view and the perspective of Hasidus that hopefully leaves us motivated really by the inner message of the mitzvahs that we're learning. So this week's topic, as I wrote on the top, is Mizbeach and Menorah. You see, the beginning of this week's Parsha begins with the mitzvah to bring olive oil, Shemen Zayizach, for the Mishkan, Kasis Lamar, for the purpose of lighting the menorah in the Mishkan. It's not only mentioned once in this week's Parsha, it actually is repeated towards the end of this week's Parsha again. The words Ba'boker, Ba'tivai Saneres, Uva Ahalis, Iron of Saneres bin Harbayim. Once again, at the end of the Parsha, we're mentioned the idea of needing pure olive oil for the lighting of the menorah. At the end of the Parsha, there's a little bit of a twist, because the end of the Parsha brings in also the mitzvah of the Ketores, the mitzvah of constructing the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden altar, the inner Mizbeach, the Mizbeach that's within the Kodesh. Last week we were introduced to the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the outer Mizbeach, upon which the animal offerings and sacrifices were brought, the Karbanos, whereas at the end of this week's Parsha, the Torah tells us the mitzvah of the Mizbeach HaKetoros, the Mizbeach for the incense offerings, for the spices, which was Mizbeach HaPnim, the inner Mizbeach. And an interesting thing we see, that the Torah at the end of this week's Parsha brings together those two mitzvahs, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah and the mitzvah of the Ketores. In fact, they're supposed to be done at the same time. At the same time that the Ketores are to be offered, the incense spices offerings are to be offered, is the same time when the menorah is to be lit. The candles of the menorah are to be lit. In fact, not only are they to be done at the same time, the Gemara tells us exactly how it was done, that the Kohen would first go in and the meitiv deneris, the word meitiv is an interesting word, hatavas deneris, because some would say prepared, the Rambam translated actually means as lighting. The word hatavas, either way, I'm going to say lighting just because that's what the Rambam says, would light 5 of the 7 candles of the menorah, right? The menorah had 7 branches. So he would light 5 and then he would leave. And then the next Kohen would come in to do the Ketores. And then then the Kohen would come back in. Would come back in and light the final 2 candles. So you see, they weren't done at the same time. There was some sort of order here, of bringing and correlation between these 2 services, these 2 avodas, the avodah of lighting the menorah and the avodah of maktir, the Ketores, of offering the spices, the incense offerings. I'm going to read the words of the Rambam I was hoping to have it also on the handout. Instead, what I was able to bring it was we could all follow along in the flow of our learning today. But I wanted to quote the words. He says, "Achar shezarkim es adam," after the blood of the morning offering. Every morning there was a tamid offering. After they would sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, meitiv zeh shebeheichel chamish neros. The kohen whose job was, he won the raffle, right? There was a little bit of a lottery every day. The kohen that was appointed to go in to prepare the candles would prepare and light 5 candles. V'yotzim shneim in a heichel. And both those kohanim, the one who sprinkled the blood and the one who lit the 5 candles would come out. They would make another raffle. The one who had the honor of being able to offer the ketores, the incense offering, he would go in to burn those offerings, burn those spices. And the person who was appointed to light the menorah would go back in and light the final 2 candles. So these 2 mitzvahs in this week's parsha, one in the beginning of the parsha and one at the end of the parsha, are obviously very much connected. And they're not only connected in their mitzvah, we're going to go straight off the bat. We're going to start this way, which is in our service of Hashem, we're going to have to figure out what this fusion is, the fusion of lighting the menorah and offering the ketores. What does it mean to us? What is it asking of us? In fact, I know in this room there might be some that have the nusach, some who don't have the minhag to do this, but in many sidurim, at least in our nusach, every single morning we start off with the ketores. We start off, yeah, okay, I know, and I know there's some people
People skip it.
Exactly. Okay, good. I felt the same way. I just didn't, some people maybe got used to skipping it. But either way, in the siddur, before davening, before we start the davening every day, we read the Parshas HaKetoros. We actually read the Parsha of offering the Ketoros. So whatever this message is, it's obviously important, not just about remembering the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash, and not only about v'neshama parim svaseinu, which means that with our lips, we're able to accomplish what we were able to accomplish in the Beis Hamikdash by actual offering, we're able to accomplish today by reading it. But there's obviously a message here for us in our service of Hashem. And what does this mean? And just to highlight this point even more, that we don't just read the Parsha and the Torah about the Ketoros, we read a whole paragraph, a whole brisa. Tanu Rabbanan Pitum HaKetoros. We learn all about how the Ketoros was made, how it was prepared, and how they were offered. So obviously, there's something here that's demanding of us something, and we hope to get to that tonight. But in order to get to that, let's realize that there's something off a little bit about this week's Parsha at first glance. And what is that? Both these 2 mitzvahs that we're discussing are seemingly completely out of place. Let's do one at a time. The first mitzvah of bringing the oil and lighting the menorah, it really, if you think about it, in the sequence of this week's Parsha, it doesn't belong. Not only that, you want to hear the literal translation of the first pasuk in this week's Parsha? V'ata tetzav es b'nei Yisrael, right? And you will command. Rashi later on, he says, you know what that means? It means v'ata tetzav, in the future you're going to command. In other words, it's not for now, but I'm telling you something that's for later. Because almost the same exact words that we have in the beginning of this week's Parsha comes up again in Parshas Emor. Almost the same exact words of Yichvei Lecha Shemen Zayizach Kasis Lamar. But over there, Rashi says, Kan hu ikar mekayim, right? This is the real place where it belongs. There in Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor, we're going to be learning, I guess. But yeah, it's right. I mean, I'm talking about after Pesach, we're going to be reading it. And now, when the Torah brings it, it's the only reason why the Torah mentions it, Rashi says. When I'm saying Rashi, I don't mean, if you're looking in this week's Parsha, it's not there. It's the second time it's mentioned. Rashi comes to explain why is this coming up again. So he said, this is the main place. The first place in Parshas Tetzava, the one that we're reading this week's Parsha, Ein Ze Mekoymo. It's not its real place. It's just being brought there because, it's talking about lighting. Last week we learned about the menorah. We're learning about the things that would be needed for the Beis Hamikdash, for the Mishkan. So it mentions it. Really. So then if that's the case, it really should have been in last week's Parsha where we learned about the menorah. There's been a few paragraphs since then. We spoke about the Mizbeach HaChitz, and we spoke about the crush. So there's been quite a few details about the Mishkan that we learned since we mentioned in last week's parsha the mitzvah of constructing the menorah. So it's really out of place. And if you wanted to say it was about what we would need to donate, right? Because last week we spoke about donating, what they would have to contribute, the materials. And one of the materials is Shemen LaMishcha, is the oil. So now we're saying Shemen Zayizach. Then it really should have been the beginning of last week's parsha, where it goes through the list of all the materials that would be needed. Okay, so it's out of place. What else is out of place? And perhaps even more obviously out of place, seemingly, is the Mizbeach Hazav, the Mizbeach HaKtoros, that incense offering, the offering on the golden altar at the end of this week's parsha. All the Mefarshim, starting with the Rambam, the Kli Yakar, they look at this and they say, whoa, why is this here? All the vessels, all the kalim of the Mishkan were in last week's parsha. This week's parsha was all about the big day kahuna, choosing Aaron and his children, what they should wear, how they should be dressed, and how they should be installed. And then at the end, the very end of this week's parsha was like, oh, I forgot one more thing. The Mizbeach Hazav. Like, why is it so out of place? So for that, we're going to go into a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation to what exactly the Ketores is, and then we're going to go into what exactly the menorah is in terms of the way they are alive and the way they are meaningful for us here and now today. You see, the reason why the Torah reserves the Ketores, the mitzvah of bringing the offering of the spices at the end, very, very end, the last thing, is because the Torah is telling us that the goal of the objective of building the Mishkan was most accomplished with this. Everything till then, it was all about v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'saycham, build for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, and I will dwell in it. Yes, I will dwell in it. But you want to know where the real dwelling, where I really, really feel comfortable, where it really makes it my home? It's the Ketores. That's the putting it the last is because that's where the objective was met. That's where the ends were met, the end of the purpose of this Mishkan. In fact, the Medrash Tanchuma in this week's Parsha says something fascinating. It says something that if you read the Parsha itself, the Torah itself, even Parsha Shmini, it might be a little bit understood, where it says that Bnei Yisrael were doing...
I got it. It's probably coming in from over there. Oh, maybe the door is locked.
So far, so good. We're on the same page. I just want to make sure. So, the Ketores. So the Medrash says, the Medrash Tanchuma says, you'll fill him in, that after doing all the avodas, they prepared all the vessels of the Mishkan. They started doing they did all the karbanis. They slaughtered all the animals they had to, and still lo yarda shchina. The shchina did not come. The presence of Hashem was not felt in the Mishkan. Ad sheikrivu Ketores. Until the Ketores were brought, then sort of the cloud, which represented Hashem's presence, was then in the Mishkan. The Ketores did it. In other words, this is exactly what we're saying, right? That it was the Ketores that were the ultimate objective of the Mishkan was seen and felt and materialized. Why is that? You see, this Mizbeach HaKtoros, this golden Mizbeach, the Medrash tells us, is very, very significant. The two Mizbeachos tells us the Medrash, one of gold, the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the inner Mizbeach, and the outer one was of Nechashis, of copper. These two Mizbeachos, the inner Mizbeach represents Nefesh HaAdam, the Neshama of a Jew. And the Mizbeach HaNechashis, the outer Mizbeach, represents the body of a Jew. And just as this is the words of the which Medrash?
Where does it come from? Where's the connection?
Oh, so this Medrash continues. Medrash actually gives a whole list of reasons to see that why it said. And I'm going to give you a few examples, or at least one example now. But it says, just like the body this, so too the outer Mizbeach this. And one of the primary examples that they bring is I'll read the words of the Medrash. Very interesting Medrash. It's called Medrash Tadsha. It's actually quoted in the Kli Yakar in this week's parsha. It says like this: Kishem sha'aguf oichel, just as the body needs food and it eats, consumes food. Kach mizbeach hanechoshes karbonosav l'maychel. So too, the outer mizbeach, it was for food consumption, right? That's why the kohanim, a carbon shlomim, the kohanim would eat. It was all about, and even the mizbeach itself was sort of consuming food, like the body of a human being. And just like the neshama appreciates more than anything else smell, the only physical sense that the neshama is able to appreciate is smell. That's why we smell besamim at the end of Shabbos, for the neshama to relax and to be misnach and to be comforted when it loses the extra neshama of after Shabbos. Lokach loy haya nikra b'mizbeach hazav el k'teres samim davar ha'asir l'reach. Davar ha'asir l'reach. That what was offered on that golden mizbeach, the mizbeach hazav within the kodesh, it was samim, spices, incense, and therefore saying. So this is one of the ways the Medrash spells out this idea. Food, like the body, is the outer mizbeach. Smell, like the neshama, is the inner mizbeach, the mizbeach hapnim. And the truth is, and here's where we're going to get to the real sort of point of what the mizbeach hakteris is. The word carbon, bringing carbonis, comes from the term kiruv, to bring close. A Jew would come close to Hashem by bringing an offering to Hashem. If a Jew wanted to say thank you, a carbon taita, or something that they did made them feel a little bit distant from Hashem, and now they had to be close, they brought a carbon, lashon kiruv, from the term of kiruv, closer to Hashem. However, in the very term kiruv, close, you're basically saying that there's two entities here. There's the entity of a Jew, and there's the entity of Hashem. And the Jew is getting close to Hashem. Beautiful. However, it's still two. The Jew and Hashem as two separate entities. It's sort of seeing the Jew from the perspective of the body, where we are sort of separate. The word ketores, although in Hebrew it means spite, the word ketores in Aramaic means kesher. The tes always switches from the shin, right? Keter with a kuf, not keter not keter as in a crown. Kuf tes reish means a knot, a bond, a union with Hashem, where we're one. To use an expression that Rashbi, famous, Rashbi says in the Zohar, "Bechad ketira iskatarna." With one knot, I'm totally bound with Hashem. That was the expression he used the day of Lag BaOmer before he passed away. In other words, ketores is going much deeper, a relationship with Hashem or connection with Hashem, where we're not just getting close, we're feeling as one, we're becoming one, entering a real union and a bond, a knot.
The test becomes a shin, is that what you're saying?
No, that in Aramaic, you'll see that in a lot of things. A shin becomes a test. There's other things like that. And whatever, just the other, what would be the word ketores? You think of in anywhere time the Gemara speaks about a knot, that's the term it uses. Kuf tes reish. That's ketira. Ketira is like keshira. Now, so when you have the whole parsha and last week's parsha up until the end of this week's parsha, what are we speaking about? Making a dwelling place for Hashem, a place where a Jew could feel close to Hashem, a place where Hashem feels close to a Jew. So where is that idea reached its ultimate? That's the ketores. So the reason why the ketores, this mizbeach, is at the very end of the whole narrative of what should be donated, what should be contributed, what should be constructed for the Mishkan. And after you speak about Aaron and his children and who should be chosen, you say, but now then there's something special. And that's the Mizbeach HaKetores, because then there's a service where you're not going to feel separate from Hashem. There's a way of and let's just spell that out to us in our time. Not just there's a service, there's another approach to serving Hashem. There's an approach to serving Hashem, which, yes, I would say in many ways, the majority of our day is like korbanos. We feel distant and we're getting close. However, we cannot forget that we also have a relationship with Hashem that's like ketores, where we are one. It's a bond, it's a union.
So how does the Mizbeach relate to neighbors?
What? It's part of what we're getting. No problem. I feel lucky when I'm asked questions on things I prepared. So, you see, so basically towards the end of this week's parsha, the Torah almost like closes, scene one and opens, it finishes off the end of all the avodas. It says, "V'ne'adati l'chasham," and that's where I'm going to feel close with you. V'nikdash b'chvoidi, and that's where I'm going to be holy. V'shachanti b'seich b'nei Yisrael l'shachni b'seicham, and he finishes, and then he starts right away. What's the next thing? He says, "And never asu mizbech hazav." And now I want to tell you about a whole other level of a relationship that I have with Bnei Yisrael, where we're not two, we're one. The word tetzaveh, sivu,